Deadpool is one of the most popular superheroes in the world, and Marvel Jesus. But it wasn't always like this. The character had terrible adaptations. Fox didn't want him to have his own movie, and he was almost forgotten. But he came back to save Marvel and change the superhero genre forever. Today in Mr. Headcannon, we're going to look at the rise, fall, and the new rise of Deadpool. It all started in the early 90s, when artist Rob Liefeld presented the first design of a new character to Marvel Comics. If the name sounds familiar, it's because Liefeld is the same guy who made this infamous drawing of Captain America. Nowadays, we think of Deadpool as a groundbreaking character, but in his early appearances, he had nothing original. Except for his suit's bright colors, he looked like the typical edgy anti-hero who used guns and wore a suit full of pouches, just like Cable, and all the characters created for Image Comics in the 90s. To make things worse, he looked very similar to Deathstroke, one of the villains of the Teen Titans. Even their backgrounds were similar because the two of them were mercenaries. But since these characters were popular back then, writer Fabian Nicieza approved the design and decided to use Deadpool in New Mutants number 98. In this first appearance, he was a Cable villain, and although he looked almost the same as the version we know today, this Deadpool didn't break the fourth wall, and he had nothing to do with Wolverine. He was just another 90s villain with no origin story, no interesting motivations, and none of the powers and abilities he has now. Deadpool was destined to be forgotten a few issues later, when he would be replaced by another villain with pouches, which happened very often in the 90s.
Good riddance.
But Deadpool stood out from all the rest. People liked the character for his sharp humor, so Marvel's editors gave him a second chance. Deadpool made brief appearances in X-Force, where he crossed paths with Cable again. Now he was funnier, and Fabian Nicieza redeemed him, turning him from a villain into an anti-hero, very similar to what had happened with Venom. We also learned his origin story. Wade Wilson had been a test subject for Weapon X, the same program that put adamantium into Wolverine's body. But since Wade is crazy, he kept retelling his origin story, like the Joker in DC. This connection with Wolverine led to many crossovers, and the two of them became one of Marvel's best duos. What set Deadpool apart was his humor, because the character was always cracking jokes, like Spider-Man. Of course, Wade added an edgy touch to his jokes, because he didn't follow a moral code like Peter Parker. For some, Deadpool was the Spider-Man for adults, a type of character Marvel didn't have until then. This formula made him a hit. Deadpool appeared in various X-Men comics, and even made cameos in Avengers stories, but he was solidified as a character in the late 90s, when he got his first ongoing series written by Joe Kelly. From then on, Deadpool was a sensation, because he broke the Marvel status quo every time he appeared. He improved the characters he interacted with, and since he had recurring hallucinations, writers could tell any kind of story with Deadpool as the protagonist, and just say that nothing actually happened because it was all in Wade's head.
That's just lazy writing.
Once he started breaking the fourth wall, he became one of Marvel's funniest characters, and even made a couple of cameos in the X-Men series of the 90s. But no one thought he could appear in live action, except for one person, Ryan Reynolds. Deadpool's comics sold very well for a relatively new character, but he was nowhere near as popular as Spider-Man or Batman. Once superhero movies became mainstream in the 2000s, thanks to Fox's X-Men and Raimi's Spider-Man, several studios tried to adapt the most well-known comic book characters to make a profit. But Deadpool was never a priority until Ryan Reynolds starred in Blade Trinity in 2004.
I played a character in that movie that I guess resembles Wade Wilson in Deadpool, and a rival executive at another studio said, I saw a little piece of Blade, and you're Wade Wilson, you're Deadpool. And he said, trust me, if they ever make a movie about Deadpool, you're the only guy that can play Deadpool.
Ryan didn't even know who Deadpool was, but he fell in love with the character immediately because he saw himself in his comics. Wade didn't take anything seriously, made quick, easy jokes, and was very witty. It was the perfect role for an actor like Ryan, who had been playing that type of character for years, and acts similarly in real life. Just watch any interview with Reynolds and you'll see Deadpool, just more good looking. As if this union was an act of fate, the first Deadpool comic Ryan read included this reference. Wade says he looks like Ryan Reynolds crossed with a Shar-Pei. When he saw that panel, Ryan knew he had to play Deadpool in live action. But it was going to be a tough mission. Fox had no intention of greenlighting a solo project for a secondary character like this one. They were doing very well with their X-Men trilogy, using Wolverine as the lead. Why risk changing the formula? But maybe Deadpool could be a secondary character in someone else's story. After X-Men 3 had a pretty poor reception from critics and fans, Fox took advantage of Hugh Jackman's popularity to tell Wolverine's origin story. And if they were going to show the Weapon X project, it made made sense to include Deadpool in live action for the first time, because in the comics, Deadpool's origin is tied to Wolverine's. Ryan was first on the list to play Wade, as he had been talking with the studio for years, but when he saw the script, he knew it wasn't what he wanted to do.
I remember telling one of the studio execs, I said, you guys are people are gonna go nuts over this. And he was like, I know, right? And I was like, no, not in a good way.
At first, things didn't seem so bad. In the first act of X-Men Origins Wolverine, we were going to see a Wade Wilson without superpowers, who was part of a special ops team led by William Stryker, the same anti-mutant who appeared in X-Men 2. This version of Wade would act exactly like the character from the comics. He would be unable to keep his mouth shut. Since the movie was in production during a writer's strike, Ryan had to write all his own dialogue, showing his dedication to the character. The problem came afterward. In the third act, Stryker turns Deadpool into Weapon 11, trying to recreate the experiment he did with Wolverine. The result is the perfect killing machine, a mutant with John Wraith's teleportation, Cyclops' optic blasts, and Wolverine's regeneration. His katanas are integrated into his skin, like an ugly version of Logan's claws. They turn Deadpool into Baraka from Mortal Kombat.
You are horrifying to look at.
The director knew they were doing something completely different from the comics, but he thought that was a good thing, because it would surprise people. I still can't believe they shut Deadpool's mouth, even though he's known as the Merc with a mouth. But as crazy as it sounds, it wasn't the first time Fox did something like this. Since X-Men 1, this studio was known for taking concepts from the comics and turning them upside down. Wolverine is short and ugly in the comics, make him tall and handsome in the movies. The X-Men have colorful costumes that highlight their personalities and reflect their powers. Make them all wear black leather. Mystique is a villain, make her the leader of the X-Men. Deadpool is a fun character who breaks the fourth wall and has a colorful suit. Give him ripped pants and seal his mouth.
That is the dumbest idea you've ever had!
Ryan knew what he was getting into, but he said he took the role anyway, because they were going to tell that story with or without him. If he didn't take the role, they would find another actor to play this Deadpool. At that time, it was his only chance to portray the character, and he wasn't an executive producer like he is now. He had no influence on the story, and he couldn't change the minds of Fox's executives. And what happened was exactly what the actor knew was going to happen.
We got a call from one of the executives of the studio, said, where are you? And I said, I'm up in Canada. He's like, we need you to fly here right now. And I was like, what's wrong? What's going on? It's like, we've tested the movie and people are very upset about the Deadpool, about everything we did to the Deadpool. And I was like, you did it! I told you!
The reactions in the test screenings were so bad that Ryan had to film a post-credits scene where we see that Deadpool is still alive even though his head was cut off. Wade shushes the audience as if he could break the fourth wall, just like in the comics. No one from Fox revealed the original plans for the character, but it's likely they wanted to do something more faithful to the comics after X-Men Origins, knowing people wouldn't like this version. Some Fox executive probably thought they had to introduce Deadpool like this and then get closer to the source material, but the movie's reception was terrible, so the studio pretended none of this ever happened.
None of this ever happened, gentlemen.
This should have been the end of Deadpool. Fans of the character were furious. No studio wanted to touch Deadpool even with a 10-foot pole, and the casual audience had no idea what the character was like in the comics. They only knew they had seen a horrible character played by Ryan Reynolds, and didn't want to see that thing ever again. Ryan tried to convince Fox that if they adapted Deadpool correctly, people would like it, but after this, it was impossible for the character to appear in live action again. But in 2011, something curious happened. Marvel released Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, a comic where Wade faces the most well-known characters from the publisher and kills them all. Even though it wasn't canon in the main universe, it became one of the best-selling Deadpool comics and a complete success for Marvel. It was proof that the character still had loyal fans and that newcomers to the genre could be interested in Deadpool stories. A lot of people who had never read a comic started reading comics with Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, similar to what happened with Marvel Zombies or Batman Hush. Maybe they're not the best comics ever, but they work as starting points for newcomers.
I really don't care.
Well, you should. This meant a good Deadpool adaptation could work. At the 2012 Comic-Con, Activision and High Moon Studios, the ones who made the Transformers games, announced a Deadpool video game. This was Marvel's attempt to replicate the success of Batman Arkham, which had been a huge hit. Marvel had already released several Spider-Man games, but now wanted to target the vocal Deadpool fandom that was dying to finally see a good adaptation of the character. The game was torn apart by critics because of its gameplay, but it wasn't a bad adaptation. It's full of fourth wall breaks because Deadpool knows he's in a video game, and it's packed with references and cameos from Marvel characters. We see Cable, Wolverine, the X-Men, and Mr. Sinister, a villain who had little relevance outside of the comics. The game is hilarious, full of jokes everywhere, and even includes some scenes that are much more explicit than what we saw in the Fox movies.
Yummy.
Unfortunately, this game faced many licensing issues and was quickly forgotten after its release. Today, it's impossible to play it legally, and it didn't have the same cultural impact as the Arkham saga. But it did show that adaptations don't need to change the source material. An irreverent character like Deadpool could work behaving just like in the comics, and we saw that in an animated series. In 2013, Deadpool co-starred in an episode of Ultimate Spider-Man, which became one of the most watched and best rated episodes of the whole series. Since it was a show aimed at a young audience, there weren't jokes as daring as those in the game, but Deadpool still had the tone of the comics. He's a total lunatic who drives everyone crazy and doesn't take anything seriously. And people loved it. Seeing that a live-action version could have potential, Fox greenlit the pre-production of a Deadpool movie starring Ryan Reynolds and produced by him. Ryan would have complete creative control. They were ready to do justice to Deadpool with director Tim Miller and the writers of Zombieland. They had the story and were ready to fix Deadpool.
I'll be damned if I didn't get really turned on.
But Fox executives were not convinced. You have to understand that these studios have dozens of projects in pre-production. Channing Tatum was supposed to play Gambit in a solo movie for over a decade, but that never happened. And the best example is Star Wars. Rian Johnson was going to direct a trilogy, Taika Waititi was going to direct a movie that no one would like, and even Kevin Feige was supposed to head a Star Wars project, but none of that has happened yet because these projects are eternally stuck in pre-production. The same thing was going to happen to Deadpool. The idea seemed good, but the last live-action adaptation had been a disaster. Ryan Reynolds had just played Green Lantern in one of the biggest flops in the genre, and live-action superhero stories weren't usually rated R. We'd seen Snyder's Watchmen, which bombed at the box office, and the comic adaptations that did work were Sin City and 300, which had nothing to do with superheroes. Kick-Ass, which was also for adults, barely made $90 million. It turned a profit because the budget was super low, but Fox didn't want to fund a movie that made less than $100 million. Instead, they could keep making Wolverine movies that made over $300 million, even if they were awful.
All they care about is money.
The Deadpool movie was doomed to never see the light of day, but the creative team managed to make a short test footage with the tiny budget Fox gave them. They made a CGI scene where a Deadpool identical to the comics faces off against some mobsters. This animated character was voiced by Ryan Reynolds, who broke the fourth wall and did everything we wanted to see. But Fox executives weren't very impressed. Until in July 2014, this video leaked on social media right before Comic-Con. No one took responsibility for the leak because it was illegal, and the person responsible would have faced a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. But it's very likely that it was Ryan Reynolds himself who did it, making one last play to fulfill his dream. This video was so well received that Fox had no choice but to greenlight the project, because they could already see that they'd make a lot of money. They announced Deadpool 1 at Comic-Con, and people went crazy, but the movie only had a budget of $58 million. To put that in context, here's what other superhero movies in 2016 cost. Doctor Strange, $165 million. Suicide Squad, $170 million. X-Men Apocalypse, $178 million. Batman v Superman, $250 million. Civil War, $250 million. Deadpool was made with a minimal budget, but they used that money really well. Not only were they faithful to the comics and kept Deadpool's classic humor, fourth wall breaks, and all his powers, except teleportation. The costumes were great, the CGI for Colossus was excellent, the fights worked well, and they animated Deadpool's mask to give the character more expression, recreating the emotions from the comics. This was the first time we saw something like this in live action, and since people liked it, the MCU copied this technique for Holland's Spider-Man.
I came up with that one.
Deadpool 1 was a simple story of comedy, action, and revenge. There weren't any huge plot twists never seen before in cinema history, but it broke the mold of what we were seeing in superhero movies. Wade laughed at Fox's continuity, the actors' personal lives, and even made references to the comics that only die-hard fans would understand. Fox executives feared this would alienate the casual audience, who wouldn't get all the jokes. On top of that, the movie was super violent, but once again, people loved it. Deadpool made $782 million. Maybe today that doesn't seem like that much money, but at the time, it became the highest-grossing movie in Fox's universe and the highest-grossing R-rated movie ever.
Wow.
Deadpool became a cultural hit. The movie's merchandise flooded the world. Deadpool comic sales skyrocketed, and its impact on pop culture was so significant that it changed the superhero genre forever. We still feel the effects of Deadpool 1 today, not just because the character became an icon, but because all of Hollywood realized they didn't have to repeat the same formula every time. Prime Video decided to adapt The Boys, a hyper-violent comic full of satire that no one would have dared to adapt before Deadpool. Netflix adapted The Umbrella Academy, a darker story than what we usually usually see from Marvel and DC that works as a satire of the superhero genre. Even DC saw the opportunity to explore these types of productions with Doom Patrol, which is more violent than all the studio's other projects and has meta commentaries in every episode. The villain of season 1 is Mr. Nobody, who can break the fourth wall and makes references to the comic writers, just like Deadpool. None of this would have happened if not for Deadpool 1.
I'm the best.
Fox approved a sequel immediately because they didn't want the hype for Deadpool to disappear, and they doubled the budget for Deadpool 2. This time, Ryan Reynolds had $110 million to play with. That allowed the sequel to have more special effects, more action scenes, and many more famous actors. Josh Brolin played Cable, who appeared in live action for the first time. Zazie Beetz brought Domino to life, and we even saw a cameo from Brad Pitt. Originally, they were going to include Chris Evans as the Human Torch to make a joke, but this was scrapped in 2017 when Disney bought Fox and acquired the rights to Deadpool.
I'm so confused.
Deadpool would stay in his own universe, having nothing to do with the MCU and the Avengers. But Marvel didn't want to confuse people by including a cameo from the same actor who was playing Captain America. They saved that for many years later. Despite that, the movie was exactly what Ryan Reynolds wanted. The story was a little more complex than the first film because they introduced time travel. Cable came from the future to kill a mutant who would later kill his family, but in the present, that mutant was just a kid.
Confusing!
It sounds more complicated than it is. They kept the humor from the first movie, making fun of absolutely everyone. This time, they made jokes about Rob Liefeld, Deadpool's creator, roasted the DC universe for being too dark, and Disney allowed them to make all the jokes they wanted about Deadpool's new owners. They even included members of X-Force, the comic where Deadpool became famous, and one of the antagonists was a big version of Juggernaut, who looked much more threatening than the one in X-Men 3.
The Juggernaut.
The marketing for this movie was crazy. They got an exclusive song from Celine Dion, who sang the Titanic song, and as expected, Deadpool 2 was a hit. It made $785 million, just a bit more than the first one, but it was still super profitable for the studio. Deadpool 1 wasn't just luck or a coincidence. People loved this character, who could stand alongside any of the big names in Marvel and DC. Now that Disney had the rights to the X-Men, it was only a matter of time before he showed up in the MCU, or crossed paths again with Hugh Jackman, who made a cameo in the post-credits scene of Deadpool 2. But that took a while. Fox wanted to do a third part since December 2016, even before they started filming Deadpool 2, but plans changed when Disney bought Fox. It didn't make sense to change the story of Deadpool 2 halfway through production, but Kevin Feige wanted to bring the mutants into the MCU to use them in the 616 universe. The problem was that the Infinity Saga was about to wrap up, and it would have felt super forced for Deadpool and Wolverine to jump through a portal in Endgame to fight Thanos and his army. It made way more sense to wait until after Endgame to see Deadpool again, this time in a story that involved the Avengers.
I can't find a flaw in his logic.
Feige confirmed that they were going to make Deadpool 3, and that it would be the only MCU project with an R rating, but we didn't hear anything else for years. In an interview with Empire, Ryan said he handed over 18 drafts to Feige, each with a different story and budget, but the ideas just didn't click until they spoke with Hugh Jackman. The actor had said goodbye to Wolverine for good in Logan, which was a huge hit, one of the best films in the genre, and the definitive end for that version of the character. Ryan wanted to team up with Jackman because they got along really well off set, and the two characters had a very close relationship in the comics, but Feige advised Hugh not to come back.
What?
Feige believed there was no way to top what Hugh did in Logan, and he knew the actor couldn't come back for just one project. Fans would want to see him again and again, but Jackman said he thought long and hard about it and decided to return as Wolverine because he loved the character and didn't want to miss out on this new opportunity. From there on, production was very smooth because they knew exactly what story they were going to tell, but they kept it a secret.
The original idea with this movie was to shoot a fake movie called Alpha Cop that was intentionally bad. It was about two guys who are sharing one brain, and together they make the ultimate cop. It was meant to be kind of like horrible. 10 people in America would go to see this movie on opening weekend, and 5 minutes into the movie, the Marvel logo would flip up and it would actually be Deadpool and Wolverine.
Ryan announced the movie in September 2022 with this video, where he admits he ran out of ideas, and the only thing that could work was bringing Hugh Jackman back. Just hearing Hugh made all the fans go crazy. We waited eagerly for the next updates on the project, and we had to wait a lot, because Ryan posted the first official photo from the set almost a year later in 2023. We saw Hugh Jackman wearing the classic comic book suit for the first time, and the first teaser released in 2024 broke the internet. It got 365 million views in its first 24 hours, becoming the most watched trailer in movie history.
Wow.
It was in this teaser that we found out the movie would be called Deadpool and Wolverine, and what followed was the best marketing campaign ever. Hugh Jackman changed the movie's title just to mess with Deadpool. They did a collab with Heineken, where Deadpool takes Logan's claws away. The actors talked about what cameos we might see in the movie, the design of Wolverine's popcorn bucket was mouthwatering, and they even filmed an announcement for people to turn off their phones in the cinema. Wolverine insults the idiot who left their phone on.
Hey, Pup, you're in a movie theater, not the cough room in your mom's nursery. So turn your phone to silent or I'll shove it so far up you'll have to answer it to you.
The hype was through the roof, and the movie delivered. Deadpool and Wolverine is everything we wanted to see. Just like the first two movies, it doesn't tell a new story, and the villains are so-so, but it's clear the creative team knows exactly what people want. It's super fun, hilarious, violent, emotional. It makes sense for Hugh Jackman to come back. It's packed with cameos that add to the story, and it makes fun of everyone. They joke about the power hierarchy in the DC universe, the issues Fox's universe had, the current state of the MCU, and how complicated the multiverse is. It's too early to say if it'll make it to the top of Marvel's best projects, but it's super entertaining. It's the movie we needed.
I got what I wanted.
And the box office numbers reflect that. Deadpool and Wolverine already passed $1 billion, outgrossing the first two films and becoming one of the biggest hits of the year. It's the highest grossing Marvel movie since No Way Home. And even though Wade and Logan didn't make it to the 616 universe at the end of the film, we can definitely expect to see them together again in Secret Wars. Of course, a big part of the movie's success is thanks to Jackman's Wolverine, but it's undeniable that Deadpool has become one of the world's most popular superheroes, even though Fox did everything they could to prevent that. It's a shame that not even Deadpool and Wolverine could fix the problems with Marvel's multiverse, because as fun as this movie is, it still has the typical issues of all multiverse stories. We talk about that in this video over here.
Get out of here.